have a direct and immediate impact upon millions of Americans. Many of the students here today will soon be looking for their first home. When they do, they'll find that the difference between a 6% interest rate and a 10% interest rate for a moderately sized home is about $100 a month in mortgage payments. And at the 10% interest rate level, they may encounter great difficulty in even finding someone to loan them the money. This is a very practical example of the extra costs that consumers must pay if the government mismanages an economy. To finance its deficits, the government has usually borrowed from the private financial system. In the process, it has contributed significantly to an excessively rapid growth in the nation's money supply over the past 10 years. From 1955 to 1965, the money supply grew at a rate of approximately 2.5%, and we enjoyed relative price stability. Since 1965, however, the money supply has been growing at more than 6% a year, more than double the previous rate. We have, in effect, been creating far more money than the economy could absorb, and as a result, monetary policy as well as fiscal policy has been forcing prices dramatically upwards. There have been, of course, other special factors which have contributed to inflation: the quadrupling of the foreign price of oil and the explosion in food prices. But the basic underlying cause of our inflation has been the mismanagement of the government's spending and monetary policies. And unless we change this basic direction, inflation is going to continue to plague us for a long time to come. We should also recognize that the inflation of recent years, the highest in our peacetime history, is at the root of our current recession. It was inflation that caused a loss in the real income and the confidence of consumers, prompting the sharpest drop in consumer spending since World War II. And it was inflation that helped to dry up the flow of savings in our thrift institutions, driving up interest rates and causing the housing industry to collapse. Consumer spending and housing remain two of the weakest sectors in our economy and account for much of our unemployment. Inflation, then, is a major culprit of our economic troubles. And even as we lift ourselves out of this recession, as we will, we must still face up to the long-range challenge of a chronic inflation fueled by the policies of big government. Still another result of the trend toward bigger government has been the definite slowing of our progress toward renewing and rebuilding the strengths of our free enterprise system. Let me give you a concrete example of what's now happening. What financial analysts refer to as our capital market is really a pool of savings and other funds that are available for private investment. In the past, that pool has been the major source from which corporations and businesses have drawn when they want to invest in new plant and equipment. During the coming fiscal year, we estimate that government at all levels will borrow upwards of 85% of all new funds available in that investment pool. Less than $1 out of every 5 in that capital market will be available for investment in private enterprise. The other $4 will be gobbled up by government. Those figures are especially discouraging in light of our overall investment picture. It is a simple but compelling economic fact of life that increases in productive performance are required over time to support a rising standard of living. Yet, as a nation, we're rapidly expanding public payments to individuals, but neglecting to provide adequate incentive for new investment. Since the early 60s, the United States has had the lowest level of capital investment of any major industrialized nation in our world. Some observers believe that on the average, our industrial plants are between 2 and 5 years older than those in Japan and Germany. As a result, the productivity of our labor force is also growing more slowly than in those countries. Not long ago, it was fashionable in some circles to believe that we should hold the American economy to a zero growth rate. I trust that the unemployment lines and the suffering that results from economic stagnation will teach all of us how misguided that philosophy is. What we have to realize instead is that the only way to create productive jobs that will permit minorities and low-income Americans to advance up the ladder as free men and women, is to enlarge and strengthen our economic base, and that means increasing our level of capital investment. Some economists now believe that an investment of upwards of $30,000 is needed to create each new job in our workforce. And to attract that investment, we must prevent the government from soaking up all the available savings, and we must allow investors to earn a decent return on their investment. They must be allowed a reasonable profit. Now, I know some students may wince when we talk about profits, because many people think they're already far too high for their own good. Actually, inflation has played tricks with corporate profits, so that some companies seem to be making much more money than they actually are. Realistically measured, corporate profits have plunged by 50% over the course of the past 10 years. Last year, profits were so low that corporations had almost nothing to plow back into business and had to dip into their capital reserves in order to make dividend payments. It's not unfair to say that we have and continue to be in a profits depression. How then do we restore our economic vitality? One answer I hear with alarming frequency is that the government should play a far more active role in regulating our economy. A poll commissioned by Time magazine showed last week 69% of our people want to revive wage and price controls. There are indeed areas in our economy where the public interest requires some form of government regulation. Few people question, for instance, that the nation's telephone system, which is inherently monopolistic, should be subject to public regulation. The growth of government regulation that we've witnessed in recent years, however, has exceeded all bounds of sensibility. The 1973 automobile, for instance, was subject to 44 different government standards and regulations involving 780 different tests that had to be met. As the chairman of a major automaker observed, government has something to say about how we design our products, build them, test them, advertise them, sell them, warrant them, repair them, the compensation we pay our employees, and even the prices we charge our customers. And let us not delude ourselves about how well the government can run something once it obtains control. It is no accident that three of the most economically troubled industries in the country today, railroads, airlines, and utilities, are among those that are most tightly regulated. Let me review just a couple of examples of overzealous government regulation in action. It's almost twice as far from San Francisco to LA than from New York to Washington. And yet the airfare on a California trip is a third cheaper. Why? Because airlines operating intrastate in California aren't controlled by federal regulations. In the field of energy, the Federal Power Commission, despite repeated warnings from experts, has been required for more than 2 decades to keep the wellhead price of natural gas at abnormally low levels in order to hold prices down for consumers. But this has reduced the incentive for the development of new supplies so that today there's less natural gas than we need. Government regulations, in effect, have created a national shortage. Take another example, nuclear power. This country was a pioneer in the development of nuclear power. Yet it takes 11 years to build a nuclear plant in the United States versus 4.5 years in Europe or Japan. Why? Because excessive government regulation. Nor has government ever had any greater success with wage and price controls. They've been tried again and again throughout history, all the way back to Roman times. Never once have they worked. But you don't have to consult your history to find the results of a centralized, controlled economy. Just look around the world today at the nations whose government run their economies and ask yourself whether you'd be willing to exchange your American citizenship for a chance to live under that system. Ladies and gentlemen, the modern economy may be difficult to understand at times. I'm reminded of a comment by Baron Rothschild that he had only met 2 men in the whole world who really understood gold, an obscure clerk in the Bank of France and one of the directors of the Bank of England. Unfortunately, he added, they disagreed. Nonetheless, I'd suggest that there's really no mystery about the way we have dug ourselves in today's economic mess, nor is there any real doubt about the way to get out. Specifically, As we lift ourselves out of this recession, we must restore greater discipline to our fiscal and monetary affairs. Neither man nor government can afford to live beyond its means. Governor Landon, it might be remembered, first won national fame by slashing government spending and balancing the Kansas budget. He set an example for us all. Second, we must lift the deadening hand of government from the many areas of our economy, such as energy, where overzealous government regulation are now cramping our growth and our hopes for the future. Third, we must begin to rebuild the economic foundations of our free enterprise system by making a dramatic shift away from policies that encourage consumption and spending toward policies that encourage much greater savings, investment, and capital formation. This is one of the greatest challenges of the next decade. Finally, we must awaken to the basic threat now posed to our liberties by the trend toward bigger and bigger government. This nation is still incredibly strong, solidly built on the foundation of personal and economic freedom. But we cannot long survive as a world leader if we continue to trade our freedoms to the government in exchange for false promises for a better future. In short, we must begin reordering our national priorities in a fundamentally different way. That is the best way indeed. It is the only way to provide a brighter future for all of the people of this country, rich and poor alike. And never forget that it is your future we're talking about today, the future that you and your children will inherit. This generation, you students on American campuses, is the first generation in a quarter of a century to have gained freedom from compulsory military service, the first generation to have won the freedom to vote at age 18, the first generation in which men and women can be treated equally, regardless of race or sex. All of these are great strides forward for this country, progress in which all of us can take a great deal of pride. But unless you stand up and fight for what is rightfully yours, you're also in danger of becoming the first generation to lose your fundamental economic freedoms. And if you do lose your fundamental economic freedoms, I can guarantee you, you'll lose your personal freedoms as well. There could be no sadder end to the American dream. An epitaph written for the ancient city of Athens and attributed to the pen of historian Edward Gibbon is still relevant for us today. In the end, he wrote, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security. They wanted a comfortable life, and they lost it all: security, comfort, and freedom. When the Athenians finally wanted not to give to society, but for society to give to them, when the freedom they really wished for was the freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free. Whether the same will one day be said of America is the basic decision before us. It's really up to you and me to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Take 15 minutes of questions.